Chair Fox, Ranking Member McGovern, members of the committee, thank you for having me. I appear on behalf of Ranking Member Waters to urge the committee not to advance SJ Res 13 to the floor. And I would observe, in response to Mr. Flood's comment, America does not actually have a shortage of big banks, and we don't have any apparent problem with allowing them to merge. What we do have, we've got financial reform experts, consumer groups, members of Congress who've been raising concerns for years that banking regulators have been rubber stamping bank merger applications and have not fully scrutinized those applications to ensure that they comply with statutory requirements, provide benefit to affected constituencies, and don't undermine financial stability. The result has been less competition, more costly products for consumers, more banking deserts across the country as local banks are subsumed into larger regional and national players. Point of fact, data here, the last time that bank regulators in America rejected a merger application was more than 2 decades ago, in 2003. During that same period, the number of community banks in the United States has fallen by 46%. That's 3,600 small banks that are gone since the last time we reviewed a bank merger application. Former President Biden responded to this problem with an executive order encouraging the Department of Justice and banking regulators to update their merger review procedures, which have not been updated since 1995. The OCC was one of the agencies that updated its procedures through a rule issued after a notice and comment period last year. And I want to highlight just a couple points of that rule that are really important. First, the rule eliminated a prior requirement that mergers must be automatically approved within 15 days of the end of the comment period when a target bank has less than 50% of the assets of the acquiring bank. That's really important to the health of small banks, because effectively it means that it is much easier for a small bank to raise capital by selling to a bigger national regional bank than by merging with a local bank. That rubber stamp has contributed significantly to that rapid decline of those lower community banks. And I point out, as the St. Louis Fed has noted, community banks are, quote, uniquely positioned to meet the challenges of lending to small businesses as they have deep insight into the local economic conditions of business opportunities. So when we cut community banks, we hurt the small businesses in our communities. I'd also note, given the volume of DOGE-driven layoffs at the OCC, any mandated review time, coupled with fewer reviewers, means there's going to be less regulatory scrutiny. So eliminating this OCC rule now will only accelerate the demise of our community banks to the detriment of the small businesses on which our economy depends. Second, the OCC rule brought transparency by including a new policy statement to clarify how the OCC would evaluate statutory factors like financial stability, managerial resources, and community needs. Given the broader uncertainties in our economy right now, we should not be removing a rule that is designed to make it easier for businesses to plan with certainty. Third, the rule ensured that mergers resulting in banks with more than $50 billion in total assets would receive more scrutiny, potentially by convening public hearings. It should be in all of our interest to ensure that limited government resources are preferentially and efficiently allocated to the most significant challenges. Finally, and most problematically, this CRA would not rescind anything, because President Trump's acting comptroller of the currency already rescinded this rule last week when he issued an interim final rule that took effect on May 15th. So as a practical matter, while I disagree with the policy of that decision, if we bring this to the floor, we are making no change in the near term. We are simply assuming that if the current acting comptroller of the currency is not infallible and makes a mistake, we can't go back and fix this later. Now, that matters in part because the OCC is not the only bank regulator. Depending on who you are as a bank, a merger may be subject to the jurisdiction of the FDIC, may be just subject to the jurisdiction of the Fed, and so by only weakening one of them, we're creating a regulatory arbitrage opportunity where banks can seek to merge with banks that have a charter where the primary regulator has the weakest review standards. I would point out that that happened in 2008. The weakest banks were trying to get charters from the weakest regulator, the Office of Thrift Supervision, and we had to shut them down in 2008. We should not be repeating past mistakes. Fred Kahn, who was the head of the Civil Aviation Administration under Ronald Reagan, famously said, oversaw the deregulation of that agency. He famously said that the process of deregulation shifts the burden of consumer protection from rate setting to antitrust enforcement, and it fails when it abandons the former without implementing the latter. So we find ourselves in a situation now where the weakening of financial regulators, coupled with the recent rescission of this OCC rule, is going to create a Wild West where only the biggest and most well-connected survive. That is not capitalism. That is Mad Max anarchy. Our job, I'd suggest our responsibility as the Article 1 branch, should be to check those excesses from the Article 2 branch, not simply act as a rubber stamp for their actions in the way that they would like the OCC to be for big bank mergers. So in conclusion, I'd like to emphasize this committee that our constituents sent us here to make our economy stronger, to make our entrepreneurs more successful, and to prevent financial instability, not just to defund the white-collar police until a financial crisis comes that we can try to blame on our predecessors. In that vein, I urge members to reject the resolution and look forward to any questions you may have.